association could come together and file a petition and have a ruling in their favor, I think that's very good news, because sometimes we believe change has to come from the highest offices in the land. But the fact that an ordinary group of people can go and really put together a historic petition and have a ruling in their favor, I think that's very, very good news. I think moving forward, for me, what I'm worried about is the fact that KRA will be appealing it. I think for me, it makes me wonder how bad is our debt levels that KRA really has to come out very strongly in terms of getting this revenue. I think it paints a picture of our country being in very deep debt and the government trying to raise every coin that's possible. And for me, I think that's the bigger worry.
Ken, KRA, of course, has indicated that they're going to appeal this ruling, this particular ruling. We now just want to take stock. How should manufacturers, how should businesses prepare for that appeal, rather?
Well, I mean, they really have to see the contents of the appeal that has to be put together. You know, in very basic accounting, you talk about profit before tax and profit after tax. The idea that you can pay tax when you're still making losses sounds very unjust and rubs many people off the wrong way, because you're, in a sense, you're paying tax from your capital. So I think the only reaction the business community can have is to sit back and to watch the contents of the appeal and maybe come up with better arguments to really support the narrative that if we want revenue for government, we need to have a vibrant business community that can pay taxes and support government operations.
Finally, as we bring this discussion to an end, particularly with regard to minimum tax, I just want to pick your mind, Ken. What would it take to have a one-stop shop policy really for taxing small businesses? Because think about it, the Bar Owners Association, I think they are some of the businesses that bear the heaviest or bear the heaviest part of the taxation. You can imagine they're paying for music copyrights, they're paying for liquor, they're paying for, sometimes they have to pay the catering levy. So we just want to take stock. What would it take to have an umbrella, an umbrella rule or policy in taxation, just so that businesses do not have to be learning about new taxations as they go about their businesses across the year?
Well, the simple answer to that is digitization. And only 2 weeks ago, we were hosting the president of Estonia here in Kenya, and she gave us examples of how Estonia has digitized its businesses to the point where you can do everything in one afternoon. You can have your businesses registered. So the wisdom is out there, but I feel like sometimes there are people who stand to benefit when you have this miasma of licenses that have to be procured and paid. So I think there's a whole political economy that sometimes supports the very manual, very complicated taxation. But digitization is the way to go, and we can easily learn from how Estonia has done it.
Very well, and we hope that a solution will be arrived at soon so that we sustain businesses in this economy. Let's take our next story that will also set the pace for the next discussion, and this one has elicited a lot of conversation. In its latest review on fuel prices, the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA, removed the subsidies of 7 shillings and 10 cents on petrol, 9 shillings and 90 cents on diesel, and 11 shillings and 36 cents on kerosene. Lawmakers want the Cabinet Secretaries for Petroleum and Energy to explain why the subsidies were stopped.
In its latest review of fuel prices, the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA, removed the subsidies of 7 shillings and 10 cents on petrol, 9 shillings and 90 cents on diesel, and 11 shillings and 36 cents on kerosene. Lawmakers want the Cabinet Secretaries for Petroleum and Energy to explain why the subsidies were stopped.
That subsidy is not necessarily sustainable because it relies on income from the fuel levy. And if you keep the prices suppressed, then obviously there's no income. And my considered opinion is that fuel levy has now run out and the prices have to revert back to the original pricing formula.
The fuel subsidy kept diesel and kerosene prices unchanged since April at 107 shillings and 66 cents and 97 shillings and 85 cents a litre, while petrol had remained unchanged at 127 shillings and 14 cents since June.
The pricing formula that is being used now in terms of trying to put subsidies, in my view, is not sustainable in the long term, especially if the prices continue going up and the government doesn't have enough revenue to be able to sustain the subsidy.
And even as the members of parliament go head-to-head with the cabinet secretaries, the question remains, who will bail out Kenyans from the miasma of high fuel prices?
Almost 50% of the value of fuel is as a result of levies and taxes. If you reduce a lot of the levies and modify the taxes, you will actually find that the fuel cost in Kenya would be cheaper than in Uganda and Rwanda. But at the moment, because of the additional loading of levies on the fuel, the price is much higher. Now, why is the price that high? Is because the government, the executive, requires income from some source. But that income is required to fund something else. So the legislature is also increasing a lot of the costs of the legislature itself. So the issue of pensions going up, the issue of salaries going up, the issue of allowances going up, the number of sittings, etc., all that is funded from the government.
Brenda Kerubo, KTN News.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Ken, this one has caused a lot of conversation, and we expected the two good CSs to show up to the Senate Energy Committee chaired by Nyeri Senator Ephraim Maina to at least be answerable to Kenyans about the cost of fuel in this country. People do not still understand why we pay so much for fuel, yet we have, a seaport really. Ken, talk to us about what that move by the good CSs means to Kenyans. I mean, we saw a lot of blame game with some of them did not turn up, others saying, oh, there was no memo sent and everything. Please talk to us about this. Are we seeing a lack of responsibility or what?
It was an anticlimax because I suspect the CSs knew that the grilling would have been a particularly rough one. Because as you said, Kenyans have so many questions, why is it cheaper to buy oil fuel in Uganda when the fuel that goes to Uganda passes through Kenya? Why is 50% of the pump price going to taxes? All these whys, and I suspect possibly they were not prepared for that, and these were sort of like exit strategies. But that said, the issue has not gone away. Transport costs have gone up, food prices have gone up. This is becoming a very hot, even a political issue, and it has. I can't even imagine it going one more week without some form of address. So I suspect next week we might hear a bit more. But the fact that, as you said in that clip, that 50% of what you pay at the pump goes to taxes, it just speaks to a taxation policy that is completely out of date, that is completely unsupportive of business, and just had to be fundamentally reviewed.
Wow, we hope a solution will be arrived at soon. Now, I want to introduce, let's just stick with you, Ken. So, the question now is, do Kenyans have alternatives? Because we have seen, of course, as you say, the rise in fuel prices is a sure trigger for inflation. We've already seen sugar prices go high, an increase with at least 30 shillings so far this has been reported. Now the question becomes, are there alternatives for Kenyans to use, and what would be the possibility of adopting such alternatives? We have seen a few cab guys or people who do the taxi business take to LPG. There's the talk about having, solar energy just to power some of the manufacturing, works here in the country. What would it take to have those alternative sources of energy?
Well, at least in economics, we have what we call the substitution effects, that we Kenyans are innovative and we can find cheaper alternatives to be able to at least cope with the circumstances. But even that cannot be taken for granted, the fact that we can get cheaper alternatives. So I think the policymakers need to have a long-term thinking, at least in the short term, at least a conversation with the matatu owners to find a way of, can those prices stay as it is, because so many everyday employees depend on transport, the public transport. I think that's the first point of call. Then to go to the markets to find, can we be able to stabilize our pricings? But even the people supplying food, even they have to make a profit. So for me, I think it really speaks to almost like a parliamentary. I think they need to have a parliamentary major debate on the state of the economy. The way we have a State of the Nation address, I think it's really important that the CS of Treasury really gives an update on the state of the economy and what are the things that need to be done very, very quickly before it becomes unbearable for most Kenyans.
Amazing. And again, we hope there will be a final, a proper way of dealing with the issue of fuel prices. Let's now take another story here which we can discuss. Commuters will be able to travel from Nairobi or Mombasa to Kisumu and Butere in Kakamega County following a relaunch of commercial passenger service in December by the Kenya Railways. The Managing Director, Philip Mainga, told KTN News on the sidelines of an inspection by the National Assembly Committee on Finance and National Planning. Of course, this one comes at a very, very good time. We now want to bring in a new guest, William Odhiambo Ramogi, who is an economist who is going to talk about this. But I now want to talk to Ken Gishinga on this also. Ken, the question is, what do you read about this? Is this a good project? Is it timely, or we had other priorities to handle? Ken?
It has its benefits because it's able to connect the western corridor of the country to the other parts of the country. So every time you talk about infrastructure, it definitely has its benefits. No economist can tell you that infrastructure does not have its benefits. I think the debate is normally really around the costs, the implementations, are we getting maximum value? And I think that's where Kenya's big projects really, really come short.
Great. And now the question is, what are some of the opportunities that we should maximize on now that there is a transport means, an alternative transport means to the road going to Western Kenya?
Ideally, we should be able to see prices coming down and people being able to do more businesses in terms of moving between the country and the Western corridor. But as you said in that prior topic where fuel prices are rising, it almost feels as if it's one step forward and one step backwards, where you have a good transport corridor that you can travel more, but now you have higher fuel pricings that almost take away the gains of what that